In 1894, labor unions called for a strike and then a national boycott, known as the Pullman Strike. This shut down almost all economic activity and even the delivery of the mail throughout the Midwest. In response, President Grover Cleveland said,
"If it takes the entire Army and Navy to deliver a postal card in Chicago, that card will be delivered."
His response set the stage for greater federal involvement in what's known as union busting. Union busting is the practice of breaking up labor unions and their activities. In today's lesson, we'll explore why so many people wanted to bust up the unions. The guiding questions are: what methods did businesses use to restrict union activities? What methods did governments use to restrict union activities? The lesson's essential question is, why did businesses and governments suppress union activity? Okay, historians, it's time to bust into this lesson. In the last lesson, we learned that unions were a way for workers to increase their pay and improve workplace conditions. Well, for owners, increasing pay and improving workplace conditions increased their costs. This would make their profits go down, which was one reason they wanted to bust up the unions. In this section, we are going to look at the methods businesses used to limit the union's influence over pay and workplace conditions. First, maintaining low wages and long hours was a way to prevent unions. Without a decent wage, it was harder for workers to afford union dues. Without those dues, union leaders could not support strikes or other activities. No unions meant the owners held the reins, maintaining power over the workers. Second, businesses employed scabs to break up strikes. Scabs were replacement workers used to keep work flowing and make strikes fail. Union membership and support typically decreased when a strike failed, and without a union, the owner and managers held more power over the workplace. Third, businesses used blacklists and lockouts. A blacklist banned union workers from being employed in an industry or company, leaving only non-union workers. A lockout shut down production, which temporarily ended employment until workers gave in to the owner's demands. This encouraged workers to stay out of unions in order to keep their jobs. Finally, many owners built company towns, in which the workers also lived and used the company store as a way to discourage unions. This way, if a worker joined a union, a company could evict them and cut them off from access to goods and other basic services. This made the workers completely dependent on the company. Not only did company owners control company towns, they often had lots of influence over the government. Before we break into the next section, answer the first guiding question. What methods did businesses use to restrict union activities? In the late 19th century, governments became more involved in union busting. Many in the government viewed unions as a threat to economic prosperity and private property because of their ability to shut down workflow, which caused economic crises. To bust up unions, governments passed anti-union laws, ordered injunctions, and used force to break up strikes. Injunctions are court orders that stop a person from certain actions considered threatening to the legal rights of another. First, governments passed anti-union laws and issued court rulings that restrict union activities. Many of these laws criminalized strikes as a way to force workers to negotiate with employers. This avoided economic shutdowns and destruction of property. Second, federal courts issued injunctions to bust up unions. These injunctions allowed the president to use the army to end strikes. Third, governments used law enforcement and the military against union activities. Oftentimes, this increase led to intense violence as the government used deadly force to end the strike. Let's take a look at a political cartoon depicting union leaders from the late 19th century. Can you see the flag these union leaders are marching with? It says anarchy. Anarchy is a political theory that promotes the absence of government. Anarchists were seen as criminals by many citizens at the time. By portraying unions as anarchists, the cartoonist was building public support for government action against unions, even if that action was violent. Okay, time for the next guiding question. What methods did government use to restrict union activities? Let's investigate the Pullman strike and see if what we've learned adds up. Whenever you see a light bulb flash, it indicates that a union-busting method is being used. Feel free to pause the video and jot down the methods being used in the case file. In 1893, amidst an economic depression, George Pullman, the owner of the Pullman factory, reduced wages by 25%. Most of the workers lived in Pullman, the company town, where rents remained high. This made paying union dues more difficult, which prevented further unionization within the factory. When a delegation of workers from the American Railway Union requested to meet with Pullman to discuss issues, he blacklisted the delegation, hoping to make the unions look weak. But soon after, the union workers went on strike, giving their issues national attention. Pullman responded with a lockout, closing work for all workers. The American Railway Union organized a national boycott of all goods being carried on Pullman rail cars. Hundreds of thousands of workers in 27 states joined the strike and boycott. Since most of the rail cars were Pullman cars, the economy came to a grinding halt. By this time, the federal government was involved. The federal courts issued an injunction ordering the strikers to go back to work and making all communication with ARU illegal. This allowed President Cleveland to roll out the army to enforce the court's injunction. The use of federal troops was one of the first times the army was used against industrial workers, making the federal government directly involved in ending labor disputes. For over a month, railroads were shut down, resulting in millions of dollars of lost revenue. But the more violent a strike became, the less public support unions received, which made union busting even easier. When the Pullman factory and rail lines reopened, many of the union members were blacklisted, and the American Railway Union's membership dropped. The American Railway Union slowly faded into history. Union busting employed numerous methods to break up union activity. Business owners did not want to share decision-making power over what they considered to be their private property. Governments also tended to view the factories and infrastructure as private property protected by the Constitution. They also viewed strikes as a threat to the national economy. In the next lesson, we will look at what happens when governments go after the businesses. But until then, keep making history.
Hey!